Good morning. I'm Father Alexander. This is St. Peter's in Hove. Welcome to our 96th step in our walking tour through the Bible. We've just arrived at probably the most exciting, interesting, and indeed well-written passage, extended passage in the Old Testament, the throne succession narrative. Now, as we've seen before, the books we've considered already have been not books in the modern sense, but rather collections of writings and sometimes editions of various disparate strands. So quite often they're not coherent with each other and they're not particularly unified. Well, with the throne succession narrative, as scholars call it, we get to a long passage, several chapters, which is unified. It's written by one person from a unique point of view, and it tells the story of what happened to King David when his family started to fall apart and destroy itself, and how King Solomon came out on top in the end. That is, how King Solomon became king, how David lost essentially control of his own family, and indeed his own state to some extent. It shows us King David's reign turning to a long drawn out tragedy, and then Solomon rising from the ashes of this. The person who wrote it, we have no idea who this person was, but one thing we're clear about is this person knew the people involved, because they're for once we do have a great deal of characterization in these passages. The person knew the people involved and was probably present in the palace when these events unfolded. Though possibly some generations afterwards it was an inherited text or something, but we'll talk about that later perhaps. One of the things that the person who has produced the narrative has done is they've interpreted the narrative. They've not just told us what happened, they've told us why it happened. Why did King David's family implode? Well, it was because of King David's sin. And so let's have a look at 2 Samuel 11 and 12. King David's army has gone off to fight a foreign war. King David is at home walking one evening after his siesta on the roof terrace of the palace. The palace is not like Buckingham Palace or Windsor Castle set in its own parkland, but rather it overlooks other houses. It's one of the big houses in Jerusalem. That goes to show that the monarchy is not a very grand sort of monarchy like that of Louis XIV, but rather a more down-to-earth monarchy in the sense that the king is one of the people. He's walking around. He is not off on the wars. He's turned to a life of leisure. And as he walks along, he sees a woman having a bath on the roof of her house. Now, this woman is the beautiful Bathsheba, who is purifying herself after her menstruation. What on earth is she doing? Why is she on the roof of her house? Now, there have been various explanations about why she's on the roof of the house. She must have had servants to carry the water up there, because it's quite a task to have enough water for a bath on top of the house. You know, usually your pump is on the bottom floor. Your water supply would be down. Water doesn't flow uphill. Why is Bathsheba there at exactly that time when King David is walking on the roof and where he can see her? Does Bathsheba realize she's being seen? Does Bathsheba realize that people can see her? Does Bathsheba realize the king can see her? Has Bathsheba done this deliberately? Or is it all, a terrible coincidence, the fact she just happened to be naked on her roof while the king was walking by, let's say about 100 yards away? We don't know, because we're not told. It's left deliberately ambiguous. Is Bathsheba a temptress, an ambitious temptress? Or is Bathsheba somebody who is completely innocent and who is a fish out of water in a world of powerful and manipulative men? Anyway, King David sees her and he asks about her. People tell him about her. His servants furnish the information. Then he says, go and get her. The servants go off and get her, and she comes and she sleeps with him. Now, quite a lot of very important questions come to light here. First of all, his servants don't question his demand for information. They don't question that they should go and get Bathsheba, and it seems like this is sort of normal sort of behavior. The king's will is paramount for these people. They don't ask questions. They're not trained to ask questions. He wants it, we get it for him. So what you see around King David is a court, a corrupt court, a court in which all the flunkies, all the servants, only have one thing in mind, and that is giving King David what he wants. They don't consider morality. They don't consider that King David may want things that are bad in themselves. They don't try and stop King David having bad things. Rather, they facilitate his bad desires. And then, of course, along comes Bathsheba. What did she think when she was summoned? Well, she could have refused to go, possibly, but he was the king. So she went and she slept with him. What did she think? Well, he's the king. I've got to do what he says. Did he rape her? It's unlikely. It's not in the story that he rapes her. But clearly, if he hadn't been the king, she wouldn't have slept with him. So he abuses his power to get what he wants. That's very clear. Now, we live in an era of powerful men making themselves a nuisance to women. And there are lots of examples I could think of, 3 of them, in fact. They're all Americans, men who had very important roles in the world and who were able to persuade women to sleep with them because they were very important men, rather than the fact that it was love or anything like that. And of course, this is criminal because it is a way of manipulating people in a way that is, it's criminal in that it's not physical force, it's a sort of emotional force, a form of abuse. So I think you could say that Bathsheba is an abused woman. Anyway, unless, of course, you want to take the opposite side to say, well, she's in fact a very crafty woman. But I think probably she's just an unlucky woman. She's pliant, compliant, and weak, manipulated, takes the line of least resistance. And so Bathsheba sleeps with the king. And he sends her back. And he thinks he won't see her again. But then she sends him a message saying, I'm pregnant. And he thinks, oh my goodness, she's married. Her husband's away at the war. Let's get the husband back. And let's send the husband down to his house to sleep with his wife so that when she has the child, we can pass the child off as the husband's, not mine. In other words, we have to cover up this adultery. Now, of course, we know only too well about sin and crime, and we know too that sin and crime are compounded by the cover-up. And indeed here, the cover-up, when that doesn't work, when the Uriah the Hittite, who is rather stupid and very virtuous, refuses to go down and sleep with his wife on the grounds that the army is living in tents and therefore he wants to be like his comrades in the army. He doesn't want to take his ease. He wants to live a tough life. And so he refuses to go and see his wife. Then King David decides to have him murdered. And he sends Joab a letter saying, put him in where there's thick fighting, then fall back so he'll be killed. And once again, Joab does not question this any more than the servants in Jerusalem questioned this. Joab's asked to have a man murdered, making it look as though it's a death in battle, and he does not question it. King David's desires are paramount. What is right and wrong, that's got nothing to do with it. We do what the king does, or what the king wants. And although, if you notice in the story, King David suggests put him where there's first fierce fighting, then fall back. But Joab doesn't do that. He just sends him out to attack the city where he's killed. King Joab knows that he can get rid of Uriah in a better way. King David suggests one plan. Joab has another plan. Joab's plan is a rather better plan than that of King David. So Joab seems to be the sort of man who carries out murders for the king. Joab is not just a commander of the army, he's a capo regime, isn't he? This is really looking like a mafia hit. I've mentioned certain people who've sinned in this way. Well, I haven't mentioned them by name. I don't want to mention them by name. But this is Tony Soprano as well, isn't it? And it's also Don Corleone. and the capital regimes, Clemenza, people like that. It's really, really, really sinister. Um, Joab knows he's going to get into trouble because the siege is not going well. And he tells the messengers, just, if the king gets annoyed, just say, your servant Uriah is also dead. You owe me, he's saying. So we have favours and favours and favours. Don't forget, Joab's already carried out a murder for King David because he was the one who murdered Saul's right-hand man, Abner. Now, so King David's, the sin of King David that we have in chapter 11 is the sin of adultery, the sin of lust, the sin of taking another man's wife. But it's really also the sin of the abuse of power, and it's also a sign that King David's world is a world where the abuse of power is routine, and therefore where the power structures have turned into a structure of sin. Okay, that's enough. We just covered chapter 11. We'll hear more later. Bye.